Greetings, classmates and professor. This is Mia, and today I am going to share with you my transformative learning journey. And this is a personal story of health, work, and transformation. Okay, so before I get started with my story and my transformation, I wanted to give you an agenda of what we're going to cover. We're going to start with a little context, which is my journey of transformation, the process of change, theoretical integration. We're going to do about 2 to 3 reflection quotes, my outcome and impact, the steps I take now, and then finally the closing insight. So let's start with a little context. So, my transformation did not begin in the classroom per se, but it began in my own life. And for years, I've prided myself in being a dedicated professional and leader. So that looked like me working long hours, me balancing multiple responsibilities, me taking on other projects when my coworkers didn't finish anything and my supervisor asked me to finish it. I just went ahead and did it because he knew I was a doer. And whenever I worked, I always pushed myself to exceed expectations. But what I didn't know is that that came at a cost, which was my health. So, in all, I was overworked, stressed. I lost my sense of perfect purpose. I have allowed external situations to determine my responses and even my self worth. And I failed to remember the phrase, what is without is a reflection of what is within. So my external situation was a reflection of what was going on internally. So my disorienting dilemma, what Mezirow calls phase one of transformation, of transformative learning, came when I was hospitalized after a serious health scare that partially stimulated from everything I was pushing myself to do. And it was a moment that forced me to stop, reflect, and face the reality that my work habits and constant stress was harming me more than helping me. Needless to say, as I was sitting in the hospital, it led me to ask 3 questions. What truly matters? How can I live and lead differently? And is what I'm going through worth where I'm at right now? In regards to my process of change, at first I resisted the idea of change. I told myself that this was just a part of leadership and this level of stress was normal. But over time, I began recognizing the emotional, physical, and even spiritual exhaustion that I was actually carrying. So, when we start with the disorienting dilemma, that was my health crisis. And then in phase two, I had to go through a self examination where I started examining how my self worth was tied to overachievement and perfectionism. And this was a rough realization and reality I had to come to terms with. I had to face how uncomfortable I felt when I had feelings of guilt and fear about slowing down because I was trying to compensate for something else. Then, when I got into critical reflection, I had to question my beliefs about success, health, and awareness. And with the recognition of shared experience, I had to see that others face similar struggles. So, in other words, I realized I wasn't alone. There were many other different professionals, especially women and minorities in leaderships, that faced the same struggle trying to prove themselves while sacrificing their well being. And then you have the exploration and planning. And I like to add action to that too. That's when I had to start introducing something different into my life, such as mindfulness, yoga, and journaling. And Throughout this process, I had to begin exploring new ways of living and leading and incorporating mindfulness, yoga, and journaling into my routine. I pretty much restructured how I approached work by setting boundaries and prioritizing what truly mattered. And then finally, through integration, which also ties into reinvention, I had to redefine my success. So gradually over time, my definition of success ended up changing, and I began teaching and leading from a place of authenticity and compassion, and rather than exhaustion and pressure, and also working as well. So for my theoretical integration, I chose three theorists. That was Mezirow, Cranton, and Tisdell, because I liked how they were similar, but they were also different in their approach when approaching transformative experiences. So, Mezirow describes transformative learning as a process where we critically examine our habitual expectations, we revise them, and we act on new perspectives. In this case, that's what happened to me. My quote unquote habit of mind was rooted in overachievement, believing that constant productivity, stress, and all equaled worth. And through reflection and mindfulness, I began to challenge that assumption. Next, you have Cranton, who talks about the importance of authenticity in the educator's transformative process. I learned that authenticity meant having self awareness where I'm learning to bring my whole self to the classroom and the workplace and even at home. And then finally, Tisdale focused on spirituality and creativity as dimensions of transformation. Her idea of spirituality being about both the inward journey and the outward action resonates with me. And through meditation, journaling, and reconnecting with creative practices like candle making and apothecary work that I love to do, I experience healing that extend beyond my career, and it helped me reach my sense of self. Now, throughout our weekly readings, I chose to emphasize or focus on a few quotes that I really appreciated throughout my transformation. And this is the first one. As Mezirow explains, transformation begins when we critically examine our assumptions and act on new perspectives. So it's not just about gaining knowledge, it's actually about questioning what we believe and why. And as the reading stated, transformative learning focuses on learning and also acknowledges the importance of critical reflection and examining one's underlying assumptions in the process. So for me, that reflection started with realizing how much of my self worth was tied into being an overachiever and a perfectionist, and how that mindset needed to shift if I truly wanted balance, peace, and freedom. Overall, I would say this experience really had a huge impact on me, and it changed how I lead, teach, and live, because now that I've went through that experience, I no longer equate busyness with success. I also model balance, authenticity, and mindfulness. My teaching and even my work as a professional includes reflection, creativity, and connection. And finally, I prioritize well being and purpose in every professional and personal decision. When we talk about the reinvention phase, there has to be a change, right? When you go through the transformation, you start off one way, but you really should be a better you in the end. And there are many steps that I've taken now, and I like to say that I'm living in my transformation. So, some of the things I do is morning mindfulness meditation rituals. I set healthy boundaries at work and delegating more tasks. I even take myself out of doing too much. So there's a lot of things I cleared off my calendar that had nothing to do with me. I just took it on behalf of someone else, or I took it on because I wanted to get the job done. And I found out that doesn't benefit me at all because other people are relaxing while I'm working. I also practice creative renewal, such as yoga. I do yoga 3 to 4 times a week, and I'm in love with it. I do candle making and apothecary work. I do reflective teaching practices and reflection practices. And I also incorporate journaling and student feedback when I work with my students. I also do mentoring and community building among peers. I finally live a person purpose driven decision making, and I make sure it's aligned with my values. One of the most meaningful takeaways from this journey has been reconnecting with my creativity, not just in artistic ways, but how I live to express myself. And the following reading by Cranton describes this beautifully. Creativity is an outgrowth of spirituality. It is not always using components of the creative arts, but engaging in some sort of agency as one creates their sense of self. Certainly is a form of creative self expression. One does not necessarily need to engage directly in the creative arts by doing so. One can alter their way of dressing or changing the style of their hair as a manifestation of this change. In other words, I see this reflected in my own life through my morning rituals, my candle making, my yoga practices, and even the small changes in how I present myself. Each of these is an act of creative expression and evidence of my ongoing transformation. So, looking back at that health scare was terrifying, but it was also the best wake up call I could have received. It forced me to transform my habits of mind, my professional identity, and my priorities. But the biggest lesson I've learned is this: transformation don't start with a change in circumstances. It starts with a change in awareness. So my advice to you is to don't wait for a crisis to awaken change. Honor your boundaries, protect your peace, and live in alignment with your values. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I hope this was inspirational to you. And stay super tastic and have a great day on purpose. Thank you.